So, Sundari, look, I've been dying to ask you something, and we just scratched on this every now and again in what we've talked about so far. But tell me about listening. I know this is a very near and dear to your heart part of the storytelling magic that you've been spreading. So, listening.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Minola, I think this is something that I'm practicing to do better. There's so much sometimes on the storytelling part, there's a lot of focus on the telling, but one of the most essential skills is the story listening piece on how we are taking in and making our notes about all those interesting stories that go on in organizations. And back to Dr. Ronald Fry, who I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. He did this work with this steel mill in the US. I think it was around 2005, 2006. The steel mill, as like a typical factory, was very good at putting up a lot of the safety posters, having a list of safety regulations, ensuring that people wear their hard hats and everything else. So all those were in place, but the safety record was not significantly better. So they
Mm.
said, okay, in a steel mill, what can we focus on? Let's look at the safety record. And one of the ways that anybody can go around doing this is to look at, obviously have a focus group, have a suggestion box, and things like that. But they said, all that doesn't seem to be working because they did have a suggestion box, they had all of that. So, how can we bring in this whole appreciative inquiry, asking questions into this practice to improve the safety performance? The whole idea was, of course, to improve the safety performance. That's what they wanted to focus on. So they did something very different, which is they didn't ask them to, okay, we are going to pull you out of your work, set aside time to do it. They wanted to be, it's something that they do in the course of work. The minute you put some of these outcomes as we can only do it if we sit in a five-star hotel in a AC room, there's a problem there. It's not part of the process. So they said, let's look at doing it over a period of time. But first, we'll ask some questions and we'll have this as one on one discussions. So they did two story eliciting questions and one future imagining question. And let me just share what the questions are. And I'm going to refer so that I get it right. So they said, tell me about a time when you felt most safe and secure working in the mill. So people had to think about a time when they felt that. Then the second question that they asked them was, tell me about a time when you did something to prevent an accident from happening.
Mm.
And they listened and made their notes. And the third question that they asked was, and there's always, the promise of future, the hope piece, which is, imagine we are truly injury free. We are the safest mill in the entire global system. Everybody goes home after work, feeling as safe as they came in that day. What would that mill look like?
Mm.
And they had these discussions and they just made notes. No interruptions, no judgment, no this. And the suggestions and the comments and the experiences just flowed. And they did this part of the questioning exercise, say in say September to December of the previous year. The next year in March, they had something as what they call the summit, which is where they go back and review what has happened, list down suggestions, collect all those details. And this is still a collection process. Bless you.
Mm.
And they noticed that between the time the previous year when they started this process to even January of that year, once they've had that conversation, they've not even gone down to the summit where they've listed on what are the things to change. They've just had those interview questions. So between that December and January itself, they saw a 66% reduction in accidents.
Mm.
So there is change, but it's like really inviting words to bring about the work and the action. You know, words can really create worlds was their theme around it.
Yeah.
I can see, you know, I can see all those light bulbs and everything else flashing all over you. Hopefully not skulls and bones, but
No, but there are several things that you said there. And I think you touched on something essential. And I just want to make sure that we call it out. I loved what you said with inviting words. Yeah, how do we invite words? And I think one mistake, very common mistake, is that when we say how we ask questions and we need to ask all the questions, we mean, ad literam, like questions. They have to sound like questions. Yeah. And when we talk about change, the risk is that we make everything look like an interview, like a survey, like a probing challenge. Yeah. You also mentioned something around the dinner, like, would you be interested in that? Yes, tell me more about it. So I really loved how you said that the question was actually an invitation to share insights with, tell me about a time. Tell me about another time. Yeah. And this is something that, they also teach you at journalism school, how to make sure that the interview is comfortable and comforting and inviting. It's not constant probing. Because sometimes, especially when emotions and tension run high, even the sheer tonality of a question can really trigger people. So use inviting words, like you said, like, tell me more about this, or please walk me through the picture you have in your mind about this. Yeah. Or help me see what's in your mind. Sounds so much more inviting that, so what are your requirements? And so how do you think about this? Yeah. So that was something, especially for story listening, that I think it's key. And you made me remember an amazing book by Dr. Murray Nozzle called Powered by Storytelling. And, a lot in this book is about listening. And there's a particularly eye-opening bit that I've been drawing inspiration from in my work around blockers to listening. Yeah. Oftentimes we think about, physical blockers like noise, or, when we're tired or when we are hungry. Yeah, we don't do a lot of listening where we're hungry or we hear nature's call. Yeah, and it's like speak so I can go about my own business. But there are so much more others. There are psychological blockers, like ego. Yeah, or your own belief systems. Like, for example, if anyone tries to talk to me about meditation, I don't necessarily listen, because classic lotus pose, eyes closed, in the background doesn't work for me. My personal best is 43 seconds. Yeah. But talk to me about mindful walking. Yeah. Or, for example, people tend to listen less when the authority is unclear. Like, why are you talking to me? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? Yeah. When their mind is already made up. Yeah. Or a big blocker to listening is the pressure to speak. Yeah. Because I am listening to reply. I am not listening to understand. Yeah. So if you already ask me a question that increases my pressure to reply, I automatically listen less, even to myself and my own opinions on the topic. Yeah, because I don't want to give away too much or too soon or within that particular set of context.
Again, lots of thoughts coming in my mind, rushing through, and I'm trying not to listen to respond. um, a couple of things. One is, on the sharing piece, people connect to shared strengths, and then they are able to see possibilities. So I think some of those questions also is setting them up for where have you seen where have you rushed in to help, and that's improved safety. Where is this? I think that's quite significant. I thought it was a brilliantly worded question in that sense. Uh, Instead of always focusing on the negativity, or you talked about, the risk of probing and challenging and getting into a negative space, actually putting them into a comfort space, getting them into a high space to share positive experiences, where we talk about, the looking at success stories in that sense. There is a room for, of course, sharing stories of failure, and we can talk about it, but just for now, in terms of, the beauty of sharing success stories, the positivity that comes from it, and bringing in that collective energy to creating change, like you're listening. And it's also about, really, in this case, like, and your think about what really causes comfort to listen. It's that trust as well, right? You trust this person to listen. You trust this person to take action if there's an action to be taken. And you trust this person not to judge you. So it's okay for me to sit here today with Minola and and think about this conversation, ruminate on this, because that comfort is there. So when you have just strangers, even strangers interviewing each other and asking these questions, finding those commonalities in those stories, looking at the success stories, there's a bond that gets created. And that leads to inquiry. You listen to their story, they're listening to your story, and together, then you're thinking out loud, pretty much like how we are doing now. So it's not just the commonality, it's not the different experience. It could be both, but it's the power of those stories, that sharing that connects people. So, I mean, I think always, to that point again on the journalist part, always start with stories, never start with a list of questions. So that you're really asking them to open up, and you're looking at how can you both work together towards some inquiry, some outcome, as the case may be.
Something that you said there triggered a thought, and it's just a call out. We do collect success stories in change work, and one particularly meaningful type of success stories are the stories of the converted. Yeah, because if you just if you have positive stories of people who have always been positive about it, that is absolutely wonderful, highly improbable, and not so impactful as someone who shows up authentically and transparently and says, I was against it, or I didn't believe much in it. But here's my journey between that point and where I am today.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think it's back, it's this very Zoom conversation in that sense. I think when I was 10 or 11, I had pen pals to whom I would write. And that stopped there when I could then meet people. We never met them, of course. They were typically, because you had a pen pal to whom you'd send a letter, you'd send it somewhere to a foreign country, and you'd get those stamps back in their postcards. And this was one way of collecting your foreign stamps. Because you were a collector, but you were a poor collector. You weren't spending money on collecting stamps. After that, obviously, that phase went. And if somebody had told me a few years back, except for the calls, of course, we were doing Skype and we were doing all kinds of calls for keeping in touch with people. If somebody said you can actually run a day session on a platform where you'll be interacting with people and you'll feel the connection, I was like, what the hell? No way. And here we are doing this day in and day out now. I run workshops online while there is, even though things have moved in person a lot now, people are still comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Because people see that it is possible to create that energy, create that magic, create that connection over these tiny pixels still.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely, I love what you brought out about that whole stories of early adopters, but stories of people who are converted, who who said, I never thought. And this is so true for a lot of our beliefs as well, right? And I think that's I never thought I could be doing this, but today I can.